Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the absolute basics on how this device works. My name is Playgue, and let's jump straight into it. Let's start with the absolute bare minimum understanding of the very basics on how to use this device. So there's three things that you should definitely know. First is what you need to even use this device in the first place, which I already have a tutorial on that. The second is what the buttons, knobs, and holes do on this device, which I have already made a tutorial on that. Third thing is the settings and the menus and what all of those do, and I have also made a tutorial on that. All right, we're making good pace here on this video. Let's now talk about the next level of basic. You own the device now. Now what? Well, you need to know how to clean your device, which I have made a tutorial on that. Now let's talk about some things that I have not made a tutorial on and that this is the tutorial for. This is not an ad for my tutorials, I promise. It's just a lot more convenient to just point to something I've already made and spent hours on. The next couple things is to be gentle to your faders. When I first got my loopstation, I was so excited to use this thing. I was going ape with these knobs, like, oh my god, and the buttons and slam it. Way too excited. But instead of curbing your excitement, I can tell you that these buttons can take a lot more abuse than these faders do. So my advice to you, if you're first starting out, is to use less fader and more stopping and playing. It doesn't make that much of a difference in whether you unmute or mute something quickly that I've noticed. So I've actually rewritten like half of my scripts to include stopping a track and playing a track rather than muting and unmuting. The next basic level advice is how to hook up to your computer or laptop. I have already made a tutorial on that about the USB port. So now let's move on to Chapter 3, Basic Loop Station Understandings. Understand that looping is a circle, not a line. When we think about music and sound in general, we think about it in terms of it being a waveform that is straight, which is fine for a lot of cases. But with looping, you can't think of sound as a straight line because then things aren't going to make sense. Like, for example, the beat shift makes no sense. I mean, it makes no sense either way. But regardless, you have to think of your loops as a loop, a circle of sound. So you're just going to think of that wavelength or waveform just bent into a circle going around. When we're scattering pieces around, you want to think of a piece moving from this side of the circle to this side of the circle. To make your brain process this easier, it's much easier to think of loops as a circle of sound, and you think of the beginning as the bottom. The next thing to understand is how effect layering works. In a lot of music programs of how you make music, you can actually layer certain things. So what ends up happening is we have the raw sound that is going in this direction. So it goes to A, input effects A, then to B, then to C, and then things that are recorded. This is now the raw sound, and that raw sound is going from A to B to C. So the raw input sound will hit A first, so whatever is on A, so in this case a synth, that sound will be processed by the synth. Then that processed synth sound will go to whatever's on B, in this case an EQ. Then it'll be EQ'd after that. Then we go to C, which the EQ'd synth sound will then be panning delayed. This matters in a lot of cases. With EQs, it doesn't matter too much. You don't really notice too much of a difference depending on the layer of the EQ. But with a lot of effects, like delays, for example, delay definitely matters. The best way that I know how to illustrate this is with the panning delay. So we have a panning delay on B, and we have this sound. And we have a filter on A, as well as C. This sound is going to go into A, then hit B, and then it hits C. Meaning that if we have A on and B on, it's going to this sound, the is going to be filtered. Then that filtered will be panning delayed. Well, if we do it the opposite, it's the same effects. It's still a panning delay and it's still a filter. But what's going to happen is it's going to miss A because it's off. this is going to be panning delayed. Then that panning delayed is going to then be filtered, and it sounds different. And I'll swap between the two so you can hear the difference. Can you hear how this one sounds more panning delayed? Like this one almost pulls it in a little bit more. Not only while it's playing does that matter, but that also matters when you're turning something off. So because the sound is going to be filtered first before it hits the panning delay, when we turn this off, the delayed portion will continue because that was already filtered. What do you want to happen first? And that's going to be A, then B, then C. A lot of times this does not matter with the order of things. However, it's definitely something you want to play around with and experiment with to hear how the different layering the different effects sounds. The next basic loop understanding is how to make a blank loop. Sometimes I want a loop to already be created. So let's say I want a loop to be 1 measure long, whatever this is. We're going to set the measure to whatever length we want the track to be. So I did that by tapping edit a bunch of times, 3 times, and it'll go straight to measure, or you can just touch edit and then scroll over to measure. Once we're here, we then hold the stop button down, and then we tap the play button. As you just saw, it created a blank track here. So this has nothing on it, but it is exactly 1 measure. Great. Let's say we want it to be a different length. Well, we just go over here, and now it's going to be a half a measure, no, that's a beat. So that's a quarter measure. Now we've just created a quarter measure. So now it's going to cycle through every click. This is useful when doing things like assigns, which is a more advanced technique, which I have just made a tutorial on that. That will be either posted recently or posted very soon. Other times I know I want the track to be a half a measure long or a measure long, and I want to be able to help with my timing. So instead of just starting from free and trying to hit a specific like beat or note or offbeat or whatever, I will just have this already going, and then I can overdub that one specific part, and then I can just go and undo that instead of clearing the entire track. Now we're getting into a little bit more technical. Don't worry, we're still in the basics, but we're going to talk about basic technical knowledge. So the first piece of technical knowledge that you should know is the file type you need in order to save a loop. Let's say you have a sound or a song or a sample that you want to put onto this device. You can do that by going into the system settings, 1, 2, 3, 4, and changing the audio MIDI, scrolling over to storage while it's hooked up to a computer via this USB-B port, and it's going to say the Roland folder. Double click on the Roland folder, double click on Wave, and from there you have a bunch of different folders. Those numbers correlate to the memory number, and the number next to it correlates to the number that is the track number. Let's say you want to save a sample into one of these folders, you go to the memory number you want to save it to, the track you want to save it under, and you save the file type as this right here. This is what the loopstation will understand and be able to read. The next technical knowledge to understand is how compression works. Now, I have a tutorial about compression in my dynamics tutorial, so if you want to learn more about compression there, check out that tutorial. Compression is basically bringing in quiet sounds and louder sounds, which is useful, but it also is about reducing the amount of data that is outputted. So this thing can only read a certain amount of data out, and by reading I mean literally playing and what you're hearing. Well, because there's a limited amount of data that this thing can output and read at once, it needs to take shortcuts, just like our brain takes shortcuts to be able to do, to output a more simple form of whatever that you're trying to play. And this comes into play when layering with your tracks and with the number of track effects. So in the song Playground, I actually cause compression to happen. There's so much data being outputted that it needs to prioritize what data to actually output. So if you listen, you can actually hear this track actually being compressed, and you'll hear less of it. So as I change the amount of compression. So check this out. This little light right here is our clipping indicator. So when this gets too loud, don't worry, I'm going to lower the volume for you headphone users. This will start clipping, and now you get distortion. So you could hear that distortion that was happening. That distortion is caused by the waveform actually clipping. So now we are in the last chapter here, chapter 5. We're going to test your knowledge. All right, now that you understand the basics, these next tips should be easily understood. So the next basic tip is loop overdub layering order. This is more referencing the compression and the effect layering that I talked about before. Well, the loops are also going to be layered. So as you talk, I doubt you can understand anything I just said. As you talk, the layers become more and more compressed. Lower layers, so the first things that you record, are heard less than the most recent thing that you record. This comes out mostly with your drum kit. So when you're making drums, you want to be cognizant of what you put down first, because if you put a snare sequence, for example, you have a lot of different snares that you can use, but depending on what order that you put those in, it will sound a lot different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer a bunch of different snares on this layer here. But I'm going to do them all out here so you can hear the order that I'm putting them in. This is layered. Notice you can't hear this first snare, that spit snare. You can't hear that. But it's there, and it definitely adds to the layering of this beat that we have going on here. But let's swap the order around. Let's do it in the way that I usually recommend doing it. Not the case every single time. This will depend on your track. I like to do the strongest snares first, and then the weakest snares last. Again, this is going to depend on your song. I would say like half of my songs, that's actually not the case. But it's a good place to start with layering your sounds, is doing the stronger stuff, more louder stuff first, and then doing the quieter stuff later on. So then each piece gets appreciated. You can hear the difference between these two tracks in how layering can completely change how something feels and the impact something has. Lastly, there's a trick that you saw me do while I was making this. I had the track start overdubbing automatically. I didn't even have to touch the thing. To do that, all you have to do is you go over to the measure and set it at a specific measure. In this case, I was setting it to a half note, which means that it's happening every other kick. Once I set it to there, when I click play, it'll start overdubbing automatically after a half a note. And I can set this for any amount of time that I want to do. So like if I'm recording, like, let's say a multi-layer harmony, instead of just pushing a button, I could just continue going from note to note throughout the whole piece. And that is it. That is the basics to understanding how this device works and how layering works and compression and all the little things that aren't exactly explained in the instruction manual. Hopefully you found some information in here that was helpful to you, even if you are a more experienced looper. Speaking of, if you are a more experienced looper or you're curious to learn some more advanced techniques, I have a tutorial already out on advanced and cool tricks that you can do on the loopstation. That is it. Thank you so much for watching. Keep the questions and comments coming. You all have been giving me such amazing feedback and have definitely encouraged me to keep making more of these. So I appreciate every single one of the comments that are left and questions that you have. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for watching these. I'll see you in the next one.